In section 2.4, we'll talk about using statistical graphs to organize and present data. We can see how data is divided among different categories, or we can see how data changes over time. The statistical graph you're probably most familiar with is a pie chart. It gives a good visual image of what portion of the population falls into each category. This is the 12,500 people surveyed and asked, what's the greatest source of your happiness? And here again, we see that family and partner was the answer given by 65% of those surveyed, over half of those surveyed. And the smallest slice of that pie was sports. Only 3% of people said sports gave them more happiness than anything else. Now, in the homework, you have to ask some questions to answer some questions to interpret a pie chart. They're similar to these. First, of the 12,500 people surveyed, how many people gave sports or leisure as their greatest source of happiness? Well, 3 people said sports was their greatest source of happiness. Um, that looks like 8% of people said leisure was their greatest source of happiness. So that's 11% total said either sports or leisure was their greatest source of happiness. But we weren't asked what percent, we were asked how many people gave sports or leisure as their greatest source of happiness. So we need to find 11% of 12,500. And remember, to find that, we just multiply 0.11 times 12,500. 0.11 times 12,500 is 1,375. Now, it just happens to turn out in this problem that that ends up being a whole number. But certainly, if I had multiplied something else times 12,500, we are very likely not to have gotten a whole number there. It only makes sense that that answer needs to be a whole number. The question is how many people, and it doesn't make sense to say 25.7 people. So in the case that we had ended up with a decimal here, we would have rounded to the nearest whole person. In the B part, if this sample is representative of the adult population of the US, approximately 250 million, how many could be expected to cite friends as their greatest source of happiness? Well, if we were asked how many of the sample cited friends as their greatest source of happiness, then we'd be finding this 11% of 12,500. But we're not trying to find the number of people in the sample, we're trying to find the number of people in the population. So I need to multiply that 11%, or 0.11, times 250 million. And 0.11 times 250 million is 275. That answer doesn't make sense. I don't think the calculator took my decimal on the 0.11. Actually, I think my calculator battery's about to die. 0.11 times 250 million gives me 27,500. That's a much more reasonable answer. 27,000. No, I'm sorry, I'm not reading that correctly. 27,500,000. 27,500,000. That makes sense because 10% of 25 million would be 25. 10% of 250 million would be 25 million. This is just a little over 25 million.